All right, Lightroom Mobile. So here it is on the home page. We open it up. So when you open up Lightroom, you're gonna, similarly to Photoshop, you're gonna get a list of photos that you've imported. If I wanted to pull some from my camera roll, I could hit the blue button at the bottom right-hand corner, and I could either add a photo or take a photo. If you select that camera button, it opens up a a manual camera in Lightroom, which is actually really good. I highly recommend using that if you want to take photos. It lets you take pictures in RAW, gives you full manual control. It's great. The other button down there lets you import a photo from a camera roll. That's pretty self-explanatory. So we're going to be going over creating mood in a photo. So I'm going to open up this leaf photo that I took a while back, and this is the final version. If I press and hold, it reverts to the original, reverts back. You can see the difference. I've kind of created a more autumny mood, and it's more focused on the leaves. So if I go into history here, we can revert it to the original. I hit apply, and it says version original is applied. So the Lightroom interface. At the bottom you can see a list of all the different photos that I have saved in Lightroom. And on the right here, we have a few different icons. You can see I click on those, it brings stuff up. So if we click on this one, this is the main one we concern ourselves with. Just this icon. It brings up this whole list. You see you have light, color, effects, detail, and optics. And this is really what's going to get our effect. We can also use the crop tool, which is very useful. And this is the preset tool. We don't really use that though. So Lightroom is more about manual adjustments. So if we come in here, we start out in the light area. We look at exposure. Exposure looks pretty good. Maybe bring it up just a little. I want to brighten the leaves. Contrast, we can bring that up just a little so you get a little darker shadows, a little brighter highlights, not too much, maybe 6. Highlights are good. I like them how they are. I don't want to bring them up or down. Shadows, we want to bring up a little, just for now. We can darken them later, but we want to bring them up to get some detail. We don't need to mess with whites too much, maybe bring them up. Adds a little contrast. You can see the leaves brighten in the white areas. Blacks are going to come down just a little bit. So already we've added some contrast. If you look at before and after, it's subtle, but you can see there's more contrast, there's a little bit more color just from doing the lighting adjustments. If we hit this button next to light, it's shaped like a little S curve. That brings up our tone curves. I could go for a classic kind of S curve. That's what we call that. It adds a little bit of contrast, and I can even pull up here in the bottom and bring the blacks up. I could go into a long explanation on what's happening there, but this is how you create the matte effect that you see in Photoshop. If you see we bring it up really far, it's really dramatic. What's basically happening is the absolute blacks are being increased in brightness, and you don't bring any detail, so it just turns to a gray. So we could make that a little bit of an effect. I won't do that now. We can come back to it. So we close light. We go to color. This is where we play with the color. The other one was more light centric, adding contrast. This is where we mess with color. This is great for creating a mood. If we make the temperature go down, you get kind of a colder mood. Up, warmer. Of course, that's overdoing it in both directions. Tint, I really like to play with, especially with autumn leaves. You can get some really pretty effects in here. So, I can play with this a little bit. There's not a whole lot that I want to happen in color, but I think I'll bring the tint up just a little bit. I want a little of that magenta. Vibrance is something that you can play with. I'm not going to use it here, but essentially what it does is vibrance saturates the less saturated parts of the image, and saturation just saturates the whole of the image, and you can see that's rather ugly. But if we hit this color mix button right below saturation, it opens this. This is your selective color adjustments. So you see there's a red circle, an orange circle, a yellow circle, a green circle, and so on. So we might go into the oranges, and I might say, oh, let's bring those a little towards red. I'm going for an autumn feel, nice warm autumn mood. So yellows, gonna come towards orange a little bit. The greens, you can see the greens are being affected if I really do something drastic. So maybe greens come here, but I might just kill their saturation a little bit, make them a little darker. Similarly with the yellows, we can pull down on that saturation a little bit because I really want to push that nice orange. Luminance can come, I like to put it up a little bit. Yeah. And the oranges, they don't need to be any more or less saturated. I think they're great there. Maybe just a little bit of luminance. If we go into our reds, you can see it's doing a little bit. You can do a massive adjustment like this just to see what the slider is affecting. I'll pull those a little to the left. You want a little bit of variation, or at least I like a little variation. So yeah, add a little bit of red there. We can look at our before and after. This is something I love about the Adobe apps. I think Photoshop does this as well, as you can just press and hold. It's actually a common gesture in a lot of photo editing apps. Others may have a before and after button, but this is just a nice way of doing things. Maybe leave the saturation just about where it is. So we can play with the other colors. I see that's not doing much. That's not doing much. That's not doing much. So now we go into color grading. This replaced the split tone function, and essentially what it does, if I open this up, is you're given 3 circles, and these circles just allow you to pick a hue. You see if you have this dot in the center that's on white, and we can pick a hue. You see how that affects the image. It's a really big effect, but we can adjust the saturation. If we double tap on it, it sets it back to normal. This circle of color is a representation of these 3 sliders here, being saturation, hue, and luminance. So we'll reset those. There's 3 circles, and that's because this circle will affect the hue of the shadows only. This one affects the hue of the midtones, and this the highlights. The highlights are like the brightest parts of the images. The midtones are kind of the middle brightness, and the shadows are, of course, are the darker areas. So I like the color of the highlights, and I like the color of the midtones. Maybe we could experiment with adding a little bit of pinkish orange to those. That's not terrible. We can really pump the saturation, but that's of course ugly, so we'll just play around with that. Something like that's alright. Maybe a little bit of luminance, not too bad. And then we'll come down to the shadows, because I don't really want to mess with the highlights at the moment. And in the shadows, I think I want to go with a color that'll contrast the oranges. So somewhere like maybe that darker blue or purple. And we can really do something drastic like that to get a sense of the color. And then from there we can tone it back a little bit. See if we just add a little bit of that. Maybe play around with the hue a little bit. I think I like purple with that. And I think we'll turn down the luminance a little bit as well. Just add a little more contrast. Blending and balance allow us to adjust the ratio of color added to shadows versus color added to midtones. I'm not going to play with that too much. And just for the fun of it, let's experiment with these. What if we added maybe a little bit of yellow? Not so sure about that, but we can add a little bit of orange, and we'll just low saturation and a little bit of luminance for contrast. Okay. So you can see we've really brought out these colors to create a nice warm autumny feel. We can go back and look at some of our other adjustments and maybe tweak them a little bit. I think this could do to be a little warmer. We're really going for that warm mood. Okay, so we'll go back to light and back to the curves, and we're going to add a little bit of that matte effect. And we can even drop this a little more and pick that up and experiment. See what feels right. Maybe bring those up a little bit. That's a cool effect, I think. Maybe it's a little strong. Maybe we'll drop that just a little bit. Okay. And then finally, or at least I think finally, unless I think of something else, we come to this effect area. And this is kind of like the final touches on the image. You can do some cool stuff. You can add a little bit of texture, which if I zoom in on this leaf, you can see turning down the texture, well, reduces the texture, and turning it up will kind of increase it. So we don't want to go overboard with this, but I think turning it up, maybe just a little bit. If I increase it too much, the image begins to look almost a little dirty, I think, or at least the leaves. Clarity is a cool effect. It kind of adds contrast, but it's like an interesting way of doing it. You can see if I really push it, it's way too much. Maybe just a touch. And I'm always going back and just looking at how far we've come. And then vignette. This is a great one, vignette. So we add just a little bit of, if I push this to extreme, you can see what it's doing. It adds a, at 100% adds a white, and at 100% or negative 100 it adds a dark. So we're going to push just a little bit. But this focuses the eye towards the center and also darkens the outer edges of the image, which I think is just a nice look. So here we go. I think that's just about it. One final thing we can do is we can add a little bit of sharpening, which isn't very necessary. And we can go over to this crop, which I talked about earlier. And we can just look at our framing a little bit. I want that leaf to maybe be in the center of the grid. So if we zoom in a little bit, just a little, and put that there. So the eye comes to the center of the image. You can even move it over here to put it on one of the intersections or near one of the intersections. I'm just going to play with this and just see something you like. Well, I don't want to spend too much time on this, so we'll say that's good. We also could flip the image if we wanted, both horizontally and vertically. That's a nice effect, as well as the ability to rotate it, but I don't think we'll be doing that. So we just hit done at the bottom. And now we've got a nice crop, and we've really taken this, it's kind of green, yellow, it's a bit of a bland image, and we really added some pop and some color and just gave it a nice autumn mood that, I don't know, I think it's kind of nice. So that's a quick tutorial on how you can use light and color and some effects in Lightroom to create a mood for your photo.